Our guest today, Donald Fagen, is best known as the founding member of Steely Dan in 1971, along with his partner, Walter Becker, who he met at Bard College. The two have released 9 studio albums, and Donald has put out 4 solo albums on his own. The latest, Sunken Condos, came out in 2012. Fagen has a new memoir called Eminent Hipsters. I talked with him in front of an audience at the Free Library in Philadelphia about meeting Walter Becker and about growing up in North Jersey, where radio fostered his early interest in jazz.
I live in New Jersey, but I listened to these late-night broadcasts out of Manhattan. There were several of them in those days. This was in the late 50s, early 60s, and I became a real fan. I just subscribed to Downbeat and all that kind of stuff. And when we got a piano, I found I could pick out stuff I heard on records. Not easily, but I slowly began to develop a vocabulary of moves I could make. So I took a few lessons too, but I'm mainly self-taught.
Wow. I'd love to talk a little bit about your late night radio listening, because you also listened to Gene Shepard, who was on WOR, and people who, I figured there were some Gene Shepard fans here as well. Tell me a little bit about that experience. You also had the experience of seeing him live, but that was later.
I did. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I had a kind of bohemian uncle, my Uncle Dave, who he was, I guess, babysitting for me, or just watching me when I was about 10, 11, about the same age. And at one point, I remember we were playing cards, and he said, "Look, I'm going to listen to Shepard." And so he puts on the radio, and there was this guy telling these fantastic stories, and it was funny, and he sounded like there was a quality about Gene where it sounded like he was talking directly to you. It was very personal, and he was a riot, and so after that I became a Gene Shepard fan, and every weeknight I'd keep the radio really low so my parents couldn't hear it, and I'd listen to Gene Shepard. Yeah,
he would go on for hours.
Well, at one point when he first started, he had a show that he'd actually talk extemporaneously for like 5-6 hours. But then, by the time I really started listening to him, he had a 45-minute show.
Wow. Is Nightfly based on your youth and some of the same material in the book?
The song Nightfly is about a late night talk radio DJ. I think Gene Shepard was probably, the model.
You described growing up in Kendall Park as being really kind of isolated, but there was a plus side to that, because you had all these probably very different interests than a lot of your schoolmates. For instance, you were a science fiction reader, and there's a part in this book about this whole thread of science fiction, the Institute of General Semantics, corticothalamic pause, all this A.E. Van Vogt stuff I'd never even heard of, and you really kind of drilled down with that. Tell me about that piece. When did you write that piece?
I just wrote that piece just because I was always interested in. I could see there was this kind of thread running through science fiction that had to do with a book by a certain Count Korzybski, who wrote a book called Science Insanity, which was kind of a big deal in the 40s among certain people who were interested in I guess what was then now would be called human potential or mind expansion or something, and it was kind of I guess you'd call it a self-help book, but it was so involved and so complicated that it's almost unreadable, actually. But John Campbell, who used to put out these science fiction magazines, was very taken with it and encouraged his roster of science fiction writers to include a lot of the ideas in the stories. And his roster included, Heinlein and Philip K. Dick and A.E. Van Vogt and so on. So if you read a lot of science fiction from the 50s and early 60s, you can see a lot of these ideas in those stories and novels.
Kamakiriad, your solo album, kind of has a science fiction basis.
Oh, thank you.
Does any of that relate to Kamakiriad?
Well, not too much, except for the fact that it maybe look forward towards a kind of mutancy that might develop as far as, at the end, this guy who's got this kind of sci-fi car that he's driving to somewhere, I don't know, there's a kind of, it's because it was an album, I didn't want to make it too specific, it was more of a kind of almost kind of allegory or whatever, but at the end he's sort of poised to, drive this car into the future, and you're not sure, he's obviously going to change into something else, and maybe to that extent.
You were lucky enough to be able to go into New York to, even as a minor, to go see some amazing jazz in clubs in New York. Who were you most? Who did you most love seeing live?
There was a lot of stuff. I started going. My older cousins would take me to see jazz, starting from when I was about 9 or 10, and then I started going myself, taking the bus into Manhattan and going to different clubs, the Vanguard, and then later on to a really out of the way place called Slugs, and I was just so amazed to be seeing live jazz, and it was a great time for live jazz. I saw Coltrane and Coltrane's quartet. I saw Charles Mingus many times because I really liked him, and I got to see some older guys like Earl Hines and Coleman Hawkins. Had a group in the early 60s, and he was still playing great. And I think Bill Evans quite a few times, and he was a favorite of mine.
You talk in the book about seeing Willie the Lion Smith, too, who's the great stride player.
Yeah, he was terrific. And I remember when I went to see Willie, his wife was sitting near the piano, and I happened to be sitting next to her. And I remember, I was maybe, at that time I was maybe 15 or 16, but I got to talk to her a bit, and that was a lot of fun too.
What was the transition to going to Bard like for you? Were you just really anxious to get there and totally prepared, or was it a different world?
This is Bard College, where I went to school, which was kind of a very small liberal arts college, and a cousin of mine went there. I had a lot of cousins. And,
a lot of uncles.
Yeah. And, I don't know. It was just like, I think anyone who goes off to school, I had a real sense of, it was the first time I'd actually left my, parents' home. So I think it was actually a lot more traumatic than I might have known at the time. It's a complicated subject. Do you have a specific?
Well, I was wondering about. You felt really isolated. This is like it's like we're doing therapy or something. You were talking about being really kind of isolated in New Jersey. I was kind of you found your crew or something at Bard.
Yeah, I mean, I found people. I went to. My parents moved to this housing development when I was 10 or 11 that was very isolated. It was built on farmland. It had just been built, so there were these big mounds of dirt still on every corner, and these little trees that were had a piece of wire around them to hold them up and all that. And some of the houses were not occupied yet, and my father actually worked for the guy who built it. He had gotten this job, sort of like that movie Poltergeist, you know? In fact, I expected coffins to come out of the ground, just like in that movie. But yeah, I found it to be very isolating. And so when I went off to school, I did find people, like-minded people. There were musicians, there were some jazz fans, and all that.
And you met Mr. Walter Becker. I guess you heard his guitar playing before you met him.
Yeah, I had already been there like 2 years. I was in about 12 different bands by then. Little pickup bands, jazz bands, and rock bands, blues bands, and so on. And but they were all a little bit unsatisfying. And then I heard this kid practicing in this. It was like a little campus club, kind of. And he sounded, very professional, and he had a real sort of authentic sounding touch and all that, blues touch and all that. So I went up to him and I said, "Hey, it sounds good," and we started talking, and then we started writing songs together, and we're still together,
Wow.
trying to do something good.
That seemed to have worked out. Was there music you remember him turning you on to, or things he did?
Yeah, he was, I was in a very small room in this dormitory they had there, but he was lucky. He scored this big room in what used to be a mansion, which they converted into a dorm. It was called Ward Manor, right on the Hudson. It was gorgeous. It was kind of falling apart, but we didn't care about that.
Right.
So. And he had this roommate named Randall, who was this kind of this really witty character who used to make fun of us a lot. But Walter brought these. He was pretty young. I think he was 17 when he got to Bard, and he rolled in these big Ampeg speakers, monitor speakers, and he used to practice and tracks, and stuff like that. But he played me some great stuff that I hadn't heard previously. I remember for the first time hearing Laura Nyro records that had just come out, and he played me like Howlin' Wolf records for the first time. I'd never heard that much. I'd heard Muddy Waters, but he knew a lot about Chicago blues and all that. And yeah, we had a lot of similar interests in music, literature, and that sort of stuff, And we had the same sense of humor, essentially.
I've always assumed that My Old School was written about Bard, and are there things in that song that are specifically about people that are autobiographic?
Well, I think like any fiction writer, it's kind of this. We combine characters, or I wouldn't take it that literally, but what happened was in just before I was about to hand in this senior thesis, there was this huge drug bust. The assistant DA in Dutchess County then was a guy named G. Gordon Liddy, and this was 1969, and he was up for re-election. Decided if he busted all the long hairs at Bard that it might enhance his chances, So he rounded up like 50 kids, and Walter and I were 2 of those 50. So, that I think that influenced the song a little bit.
Yeah, I guess so. Not going back. Our audience here might be interested in a part of the book where you kind of indicate that your interest in drugs, particularly smoking pot, kind of faded early. It became an unpleasant experience.
Yeah, I was never a big drug person. I had this was back in the there was no pot in my high school back then. I mean, there was nothing like that. But when I got to college, there's a lot of pot smoking. I was a casual pot smoker, but I did have an interest in LSD because a friend of mine who went to Brandeis had come back the summer before I went to Bard, and with these sugar cubes, with LSD on it. And I knew, I actually read a lot about Timothy Leary, who back then, this is before he sort of made a fool of himself and became a big drug guru. He had been fired from Harvard for giving, experimenting on students. But he had put out this book that was a kind of a guide to having a, fruitful experience on LSD called The Psychedelic Experience. And so I knew about that book, and you were supposed to take it with another person as a sort of guide or a therapist who didn't take it, as a safeguard. And I actually did this with this friend of mine, and it was fantastic. And so I was interested in that, but by the time, I think a year or two later, I lost interest in it, and I figured I got about as much out of it as I could. And after that, I really stopped taking drugs, and I was never a drinker, so I was kind of, a killjoy, really.
Was Chevy Chase really your drummer at Bard?
I went to school with Chevy at Bard. He was a very good drummer, actually, and he also was a pretty good piano player, too. And Walter and I, we were in pickup bands with him, stuff like that. And he was good. And in fact, after school, before we went to the West Coast and started Steely Dan, I remember he came down once, and we were thinking of doing a 2-keyboard thing with him and starting some kind of band, but he eventually decided to go into comedy. He was good. Funny.
That worked for him too.
It's funny. Bard didn't have a fraternity, but he seemed like he was in a fraternity. You know what I mean? He was the only guy there who looked like he was in a fraternity.
In the early years, Steely Dan, obviously you were off, you were kind of out of the business there for a few years, but you were, at the very beginning, not really keen on touring either. It seemed like it took a while for you to get it so that it would sound good enough.
Well, in the 70s, the group was thrown together very quickly, and Walter and I were mainly interested in making records. That was our main, desire, really. And we were working as staff writers for ABC Dunhill in Los Angeles. We'd gotten this job, $100 a week. It was pretty good. And but we had this other book of these other songs that we needed to be in a band as a vehicle for these particular sorts of this kind of material. And so the president of ABC Dunhill finally gave us the budget to make a record, and so we called some guys we knew from the East Coast, and they came in and we made the record, and then it hit right out of the box. And the record company said, "Great, you're going out on tour." And we'd never played live, really, with these guys, and it was they were great. They had a lot of enthusiasm. They were really into it, but it wasn't the best matchup, as both musically or definitely personality-wise. There were some problems. So we toured for 2 years, and then we called it quits.
Which was more challenging, and why? Writing your first book or writing that first Steely Dan album?
I don't remember much about writing the first Steely Dan album. I like writing because you don't have to rhyme anything. Takes a big burden off your, you know.
How has the nature of collaborating with Walter changed over the years? Because I've heard you describe it as a true collaborative thing. You'll sit down and actually, it's not like somebody comes in with a melody and somebody comes in with the lyrics. It's a true collaboration, or it has been.
Well, that will happen sometimes, but generally speaking, I think it's more. It's not like we go off and each write a song and then come in and you know, fix them up or something. We sit in a room and he's got a guitar and I'll be playing the piano and we'll. You know, one of us will have an idea for something, and then perhaps the other guy will amend the idea and make it a little better, and then, you know, we'll. There's different ways you can start. You can start with a thematic idea, which is to say, for the lyrics, a little stretch of music, maybe, or a little hook line, or even just some phrase or something like that, and then we'll just like kick it around together. You know, we'll you know, joke, make a lot of jokes and start laughing, and you know, write these, you know, write the thing together. So I think it is a true collaboration.
Yeah. How hard is it for you and Walter to get up on stage?
It's not hard anymore. There was a time when I had, you know, a certain amount of stage fright, mostly back in the 70s, though. I kind of, you know, after a while you can get used to anything, you know.
What part of it? Worrying about what you were playing, or just looking at the audience, or?
It's just, you know, lack of confidence and being really self-conscious, I think, and you know, I think if you're really well rehearsed and confident about your band, and you know that they have your back and all that, it makes it a lot easier, you know.
Do you know a song's a hit before it becomes one?
I don't know anything about hits, or I don't know any business, or you know, I've been just ripped off, you know, upside, downside, every way you can think, you know. And I don't know anything about, you know, hits or promotion or anything like that.
There's a bit in your tour diary about playing Deacon Blues, and that turned out to be, I think that's kind of a surprising hit song in a way.
Well, it was very long.
Yeah.
It was, I forget, it's at least 6 minutes plus, something like that. And, yeah, that was a surprise. That was a hit.
What kind of advice would you give to a student who wants to study music and have a career in music today?
Advice? You have to learn technique on your instrument if you play an instrument, I think, and you could do that maybe with private lessons or something, but like a lot of people who come out of there's a few jazz programs now, but a lot of the guys who come out of the jazz programs all sound the same. They learn from these books of patterns and scales and patterns, and you know, you can't tell one guy from the next. It's like, I think, you know, the more you can do by yourself and put yourself into it, the better you're gonna. Because like these old guys, like you know, like me. So I'm not a great jazz player, but there are some like people like Sonny Rollins. I mean, or going back to Louis Armstrong or whatever. Their styles were so defined, you know. They were such individuals that's what makes them great, you know. And they didn't go to jazz school, you know.